Hey y'all, hope you're doing well today. So, in today's message, we're going to be talking about the shadow self, and we're going to be looking at it a little bit differently than the standard generalized type stuff you can find online. So, I hope that I can bring you a new lens to look through to evaluate the concept of the shadow self, and I hope that it's beneficial for you in some way. And I hope you're doing good. So, I'm sorry I haven't posted a video before now. I mentioned in my community post, I've been very busy with a problem with my house. And it's one of those things where sometimes there's just not a quick solution. You just have to, keep trying different things. And so it's a process, and I'm working on it. But I'm hanging in there, and I'm exhausted. But I've missed making my videos and sharing with you all. And the funny part of it is, over the last few days where, even though I've been primarily focused on resolving this issue I have, my mind has just it's been flooded with all these ideas for videos. So I've taken a whole lot of notes and I just haven't had the time to present them. So I hope you enjoy it. So, it's with life, with having your reality shaken up by someone who is a skilled liar, someone who is a very good deceiver, someone who is fluent, you might say, in deception. It does forever change you. And, I don't know that you can ever come to a place where you'll never be fooled again, but I think that you can certainly become wiser. And to me, shifting the focus onto ourselves after the discovery of how good some people are at their game, at snowing you over, shifting the focus onto ourselves primarily is where we find our empowerment. And that's why I like to focus on topics that are centered around just personal growth, evolving, healing, gaining perspective, wisdom, understanding, and just evolving and growing. And so that's going to be the spirit of the message today as we look at the shadow self. It's not going to be centered on the people who are fully operating in the darkness, you might say, in that manner. It's not going to be like that. So, the secret of the shadow, which is probably what I'm going to wind up titling this particular video, is that it seems upon first glance to be a bad thing. And this is where, when we are willing to reevaluate these old thought structures and patterns and beliefs, we can, find, buried treasure, you might say. And it's really, people who are seeking, just like the Bible says, seek and you shall find, knock on the door shall be open for you, And what happens, I think, is we just get so comfortable with a current lens perception filter, and we just stick with it for years and years and years and years, or even decades, and it serves us okay, but at some point when there's consequences happening in our life, our health is declining, we're starting to become very confused, there's all these little signs that start to happen that clue us in to the fact that lens perception filter, it needs to go. It's like finding out someone is not who you think they are, is not always something that happens for us in an instant. For a lot of us, it's in stages, and it's both a process of discovery as well as a process of acceptance. because some things are just hard to accept. But the shadow self it kind of works like that too. Just getting to know it in stages, accepting it, in stages, and getting to a place where we can, I think the word would be integrate it, into our conscious awareness to help us to fully embody all that we are designed to be. So that's going to be kind of the lens that we're going to look at it through today. So, yes, someone who who is hiding an aspect of themselves, excuse me, someone who is consciously hiding an aspect of themselves is someone who is living in deception. We know that, right? But the shadow self gets hidden unconsciously. So that's not something that we consciously do on purpose. It's just an automatic type mechanism within the human psyche. And so, based on my research anyway. So the reason is because, a person, if they haven't reached a certain level of maturity, I feel like it's spiritual maturity, but, you might also say psychological maturity, emotional maturity. If a person hasn't evolved to a certain point where it's not going to totally destabilize them, then that means that if they haven't evolved to that point, then they're not ready to integrate the shadow part of themselves into their conscious awareness. So until that point comes, it kind of stays tucked away out of the reach of our conscious awareness. And it does that, it sits back there in the darkness of our psyche for a reason. It's because it's threatening to our conscious awareness. And the reason that is, this is all my perspective, but I hope you find value in it. And I have done some research on it too. But the reason it stays tucked away is because for whatever reason, be it, being shamed or ridiculed, psychologically abused growing up, being made fun of, just experiencing some kind of consequence for, just being a particular way or doing or saying something in particular. There's something that has happened, and it may even just be a belief that formed within a person that wound up creating a judgment, like labeling a part of ourselves as bad, quote unquote. Okay? So, what happens is this piece or part of us that gets labeled as bad, we can't, it's threatening to our peace. It's threatening primarily to us because we have this innate desire to belong. And that's just a survival instinct, to want to belong to your community, to your tribe, your people, It's just an automatic unconscious thing. It's innate. And so because, any part of us that has, been examined through the lens of judgment, because it's threatening to us, then again, it kind of gets denied. But it's all an unconscious process. Again, someone who consciously denies a part of themselves is living in deception. To some degree, on the spectrum of deception, it's still deception. If it's done on purpose, if it's something is consciously, intentionally denied, then, withholding or denying something is still a form of deception, But when the shadow self within a person with a good heart, a person with good intentions, when that shadow self is not made conscious, it can actually work against that person to self-sabotage. It's kind of like acting like your own personal villain, like your own arch nemesis, you might say. And so, essentially what it represents is the opposite of who we see ourselves as. And we're going to take a look at this chart. I'm going to go ahead and pop it up on the screen for you. So this is a wonderful chart that explains the Jungian archetypes. And so as you can see, there's like these particular personality types, you might say. And within each type, there's a good side and you might say a bad side through the lens of judgment, right? So like a Jekyll and Hyde within each personality type. So, it's a weird concept that we are both who we think we are, and we have the potential to be our total opposite too, right? So, it's just I found that chart and I thought that was, a really great example of this concept here. So that part that's deemed, something that we should feel bad about or be ashamed of or whatever, that's the part of us that gets tucked away in the unconscious, right? It's the shadow self. So is it true? Is it true that we have this double-sided, this two-sided aspect to ourselves? Because that kind of feels it doesn't feel right. It doesn't to me, like conceptually. I feel like I am who I am, and but again, this is all an unconscious process. So I'm reminded of that Native American story about the two wolves. So I'll drop the website link to this story down in the description, but this is one version of it at least. So it says, an old Cherokee is teaching his grandson about life. "A fight is going on inside me," he said to the boy. "It is a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego." And he continued, "The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside you and inside every other person too." The grandson thought about it for a minute, and then he asked his grandfather, "Which wolf will win?" And the old Cherokee simply replied, "The one you feed." And so, this is one of those things where it's kind of a part of humility, the trait of humility, having the willingness and the maturity to acknowledge your faults and your flaws, and then again, I look at this as a spectrum, and then you have people who are so traumatized that it has affected them to such a degree that they're way on the other end of the spectrum, and they are in total denial of anything that they feel like is bad about themselves, to the degree that they live solely from this buffed up ego, this mask, because it's not real. It can't be real because nobody's perfect, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. But yeah, and then there's obviously the gray area in between, right? But I've always enjoyed that story about the wolves, and I think there's a lot of truth to it, and I think it fits on the topic today when we're thinking about, our shadow self, if we consider the concept of our biological mothers as portals, then we can start to understand, how important it is as far as how our relationship is with our mother, because that's technically the first person that we are acquainted with as we come into this human existence, and in examining the dual nature of mothers with regards to raising their children. I read an article on this a while back, and I don't remember where it was or what it was, but it was interesting because it was talking about, the delicate balance of raising a child, the guidance, and how, there's a necessary component of control and dominance and oversight, but it's a delicate, fine line. And so it was talking about, if you don't enforce enough authority, and control and involvement, if you don't participate, enough with regards to your child's development, well, that's going to be detrimental for the child. We know that, right? And then looking at the other extreme, too much oversight and involvement and control and guidance, all this stuff, too much would be also detrimental to the child. So there's this concept, and you can look it up, called a good enough mother. And I don't remember the original psychologist that came up with this term, this label, but Sam Vaknin has a channel on YouTube, and he talks about it too from time to time, the good enough mother. But essentially, it represents a balanced approach to leadership and stewardship, with your child. And it means that, you might start off with, more involvement with a child, more guidance, more control from, obviously a place of love, to secure the child's, safety and keep them, away from danger and all this, right? But it's a stepping down approach to parenting. So it's like a dance. It's like this delicate dance to maintain this balance. Excuse me. That is directly correlated to the child's ever-changing and evolving maturity levels, consciousness. As the child evolves consciously, then, the mother's able to kind of back off and give the child a little bit more freedom to make their own decisions and to, exercise their own judgment, to develop that aspect too, so they can develop self-assurance and confidence in their own inner guidance, But it's like something, again, that happens in stages, right? And so there's, in doing this, there's like this slow transfer of power, you might say, of authority, right, over to the child. It transfers over to the child as it becomes ready at different levels. So, to me, even coming into a conscious decision to parent in this way consciously, that reveals an acknowledgement within a parent, within a mother, or any parent, of the awareness of the dangers of too much and or too little control, So, conscious parenting, it certainly makes a difference. So, a lot of people, if we kind of translate this over to, the concept of God as this parental figure, right? And we as his children. A lot of people are put off by religion or even spirituality when God is thought of or represented and perceived as, all good. A lot of people feel like that's totally a wrong representation of God. And then also people are equally put off when God is represented as just too harsh and what you might call punitive, right? So, the Bible has many stories of both God's wrath and of God's love and mercy. It's a dual nature. It's a dual nature. And so, generally, this is where, you have to look at the details. You have to. And it's for me coming into the understanding of what black and white thinking is. It's one thing to think you understand what it is, but then to do a deeper dive and truly evaluate it and apply it. A lot of times I think about math. Let me give you an example. So it's kind of like the difference. I feel like I've talked about this recently, and if I have, I apologize if I'm repeating myself. I don't remember. But it's kind of like this. It's kind of like, it's one thing to learn how to do these really complex algebra problems. It's like that can be really impressive. But to apply it to real life is something else. So like for me, for whatever reason, I was able to do those, really complex algebra problems. Didn't really serve me very well. A little bit, but not a lot, out in real life, in the real world. And then you have the word problems in math classes that are actually applicable, right, to real life. And those would just make my head spin. Just like you've seen the little the memes that are the jokes, talking about word problems. It's like, if a car leaves, New York City at 5:15 and travels, so many miles per hour to this place, and there's this many miles in between, and but there was one stopover, for lunch for 20 minutes here, and then the answer, and the jokes, is like, three bananas or whatever. It's just, and that's how it always seemed to me. It was like, yeah, that's about right. These word problems, they just made my head spin. And so to me, that's what critical thinking can do for us sometimes. But if we push through and we're able to get that understanding because we work for it, it certainly pays off. And so truly getting to a point where we understand, what does black and white thinking look like in our life, in our day-to-day life? Where does that lens, that perception filter, it's kind of like when you're switching out a lens on your camera. I used to do photography. This was before, digital cameras were real big. I'm dating myself for sure. But anyway, you would switch out your lens, your filter. You'd have filters and different lenses, actually. And so it's kind of like if you think of a concept or a little nugget of wisdom, like black and white thinking, just put that on as a filter, and then you look through your camera. It's like, okay, so where can I apply this, at what I'm looking at? And so this whole dual nature concept, to me, is in alignment with the concept of the shadow self. It's kind of like saying, it's acknowledging, like the story of the two wolves, that, okay, maybe there is, a dual nature in all of us, after all. It's just calling it different things. It's just using different labels. But, getting to a place of wanting truly to learn so much that you're not going to just be, immediately triggered by and offended by whatever is reflected back to you in your research. That's important. You have to get to a place where you're willing to self-evaluate, and that can be, a tender spot when you have been raised by people who ridiculed you or patronized you or shamed you or whatever it was. Just as much, I feel like, as if you, or if you spent many, many years or decades in a marriage or a very toxic friendship where a person just shamed you, So there's a difference, though. There's a difference between being able to self-evaluate in a healthy way, and then also the difference would be that and judging yourself, because you can, when you're healthy, you can self-evaluate for the purposes of learning and growing without judging yourself, without condemning yourself. And that's a really integral part of getting acquainted with your shadow self and eventually integrating it into your conscious awareness to feel truly whole and like you don't have anything to be ashamed of, because it's okay to be imperfect. So this dual nature of God, again, it's exemplified in all these biblical stories of his wrath as well as his love and mercy, right? The dual nature. They say what we resist persists. It's kind of like, just a real life example, it's kind of like, whatever we put off, if we just keep putting something off, keep putting it off, it winds up sabotaging us because we're laying there, in bed at night thinking about it instead of sleeping. So, yeah. So it feels normal to want to deny things, even like feelings like anger or especially if it's intense, like rage, Even when we've been truly and deeply wronged, it's almost like we don't feel like we can even give ourselves permission to feel those feelings sometimes, because there's this attachment to judgment. These feelings have this, they're all attached to judgment. So we know that suppression is not the answer, and neither is full, unfiltered, untethered expression either. That's not the answer, right? When you're thinking about things like rage. But if you think about it, embracing one or the other options as choices and selecting one, again, this is your black and white thinking. Well, we're actually limiting ourselves when we're doing that. That's not acting from a place of being a wholly integrated person. So, God isn't limited. And we know that with God, we are not limited either. With God, through the Holy Spirit, you might say. So when we don't embrace the full spectrum of who we are not living out the full truth of who we are. It's like choosing the positive at the full exclusion of the negative, unconsciously. It might feel like the right thing, but there's this inner friction. Sometimes it manifests as pain, or like you can't put your finger on it. There's a longing. There's desire. There's confusion. It's why is this? It's because we're unconsciously betraying ourselves when we're not allowing ourselves to accept all that we are, faults and flaws and all. Then we are betraying ourselves. We're not validating and acknowledging, everything that we are. And so it truly is a form of betrayal. I see it that way. So another lens you might use thinking about this dual nature is contrast. Contrast is really important in art. And I'll give you an example. When you're, this was something I learned in college, and I think I've mentioned this before too, but like when you're wanting a painting to really, not so much look cartoonish, but have that pop of reality. As an example, if you're painting the ocean, you're not just going to, mix up blue, a particular shade of blue, rather, because it's a primary color. You don't have to make it. But whenever you get your blue you want for your ocean, you're not just going to use that for the whole ocean. You want to have variation in your color. And it's the same thing if you're blending some colors to make a secondary color, for example, like a field of grass, right? You're not just going to blend your green and put that out there. You're actually going to want the different yellows and blues that you use to make the green. You're going to want that to stand out within your grass, even though it's kind of like it messes with your mind because you're thinking, when I look out there, I don't see blue and yellow. I see green. Well, it's kind of like, look again. Art, my painting classes in college taught me to look closer, and in doing so, and a trick that my painting teacher, who was an incredible artist, what he taught me was to squint your eyes. So if you squint your eyes, I'm thinking of myself without my glasses. If you have to wear contacts or glasses, you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, he taught us to squint your eyes, and it was kind of like, in doing so, it makes the contrast pop. What might blend together just, as you're just looking normally, it's kind of like just creating this opportunity, this avenue for contrast to really pop, and then you start to see those colors within what you thought was a singular color, and that's what gives a painting more of a realistic look, whether it's skin tone and you're painting portraits or whether it's landscape art. That variation just keeps it from looking flat and cartoonish, So denying contrast is kind of like, if you transfer this over to psychology, it's kind of like enmeshment, and I'm going to reference Sam Vaknin again. He talks a lot about how a narcissist, and I hope that I'm saying, this right. I hope I'm relaying the message right. I just encourage you to take a look at his channel if you have interest. But he basically explains how narcissists have this tendency to internalize people within their own mind and make them into these objects that are really only existent within their mind. And so in so doing that, they kind of take you for granted. They dismiss you easily. They don't acknowledge you for your own unique, separate self. There's all these consequences for doing that. It's just almost like an automatic type thing that happens with some people. And in my experience, what happens is they expect you to be just a certain way, to fit this mold. And it's almost like for a person who's living a double life or a hidden life, and they have this facade constructed to present to the community or their family or whoever it is, to hide their true self. If you are serving as part of that facade, part of their mask, then they're going to hold you to very strict standards. It's like any deviation at all from what they have set in their mind, these expectations of how you should be, what part you play in that facade. If you deviate at all with creativity or self-expression or anything at all, they react to that. And with a covert type person who's exploiting you, I don't like to use these labels, but you know what I'm saying. With someone who's covert, they don't necessarily yell at you, but they will get the point across in many different ways, and that's for a whole nother video. That you are not behaving or dressing like or saying or doing or not doing things just the way they expect you to. And so it keeps you confined, and in this manner I certainly think this plays a big part in losing yourself and getting out of touch with your own inner guidance. Because if you love a person who is this way, you don't want them to be disappointed in you. You want them to be happy. It's not even necessarily a selfish thing. It's not that you don't want them to be disappointed in you, but you don't. But it's also that you just want to see them happy once in a while. Like, man, just to be able to see a genuine smile or laugh and not to just see this constant undertone of agitation, that would be great, And so, but the thing is, these people have excellent control. They have just a great ability to control themselves as part of their mask. Because what you might find with these people is that they will cut loose and just, let down their guard around certain people, say certain groups of people or whatever. And usually it's when you're nowhere around and they don't know that you have seen that side of them. So again, there's a dual nature. And I feel like with some of these people that are just totally living a lie, there's probably more than two. There's probably several sides to these people, but there's a difference in again, someone who's consciously living out a double life versus someone who is has a good heart and good intentions, but there's these unconscious mechanics within their psyche. So. But in going through an experience where you see someone acting these things out externally, it does make you curious about the human psyche in general, And I don't know that we'll ever fully understand what makes a person go and do what they do and be the way they are and make the choices that they do and totally just, make the choices they do. I don't think we'll ever fully understand that. But again, it's kind of like, time goes on, time moves on, and the older you get, the faster it goes. And so at some point, I feel like a lot of us do make the choice to shift our energy and our attention onto ourselves, and try to, in our own way, make up for lost time, and reparent ourselves, you might say, and just invest in ourselves and learn and grow and heal and And then when you find other people doing the same as you, it's a beautiful thing. And so, but this contrast I was talking about with art, denying contrast is like enmeshment, just like the example I gave there, where you're not even seen as your own separate person. So, when you're involved with someone like that, and it's like you don't really exist as a separate person, it's also seen within like family dynamics where there's enmeshment. So there's a term too. If you're not familiar with it, you can look up enmeshment. There was this weird song when I was in high school by Mazzy Star called Fade Into You. And it kind of had this dreamy kind of feel to it, kind of like this romantic allure, you might say. And I think it was supposed to be kind of romantic or whatever, but it always kind of gave me the creeps, and I didn't really know why. And so now it's kind of like even those lyrics are just, I don't even want to hear, lyrics like that. Nothing against the band or anything, but, you don't ever want to experience just fading into an enmeshed environment or dissolving completely in any kind of friendship or relationship or group or whatever it is. You don't want to lose yourself, God made you for a reason, and in a healthy relationship, you retain that. You retain your essence, and you don't have to sacrifice and sabotage in a healthy relationship, right? So, our emotions are, we talk a lot about the personification of different aspects of oneself in these myths and legends and fairy tales and all, especially in the hero's journey. But emotions can be those helper characters in real life. Again, we're looking at it through the word problem, the math word problem, like, okay, where are the helpers in my life? Well, you may have helpers that are real people that you feel like are just absolute angels. They must have been sent directly from God, It's like sometimes you meet these people and you're like, I have no doubt that our paths were meant to cross, and we're meant to walk, the path together or whatever it is. And so sometimes those are your helpers and you help one another. Iron sharpening iron. But then other times, helpers can be emotional support just through a loving presence, like, an animal, a pet dog or cat or, whatever it is. We have a fish. I love our fish. I love to come home and see her. She makes me happy. She lets me know when she's hungry. She starts, going up to the top of the water and just kind of, chomping at the water, like feed me, and she goes down to her gravel and she picks up her gravel and makes a lot of noise. It's like, I'm like, I got it. I got the message. You want more food. So, but the essence of life in general is just a beautiful thing. And, emotions can serve as those helper roles because some people are just going to make you feel uneasy before you actually recognize they don't seem to carry that same spiritual essence of life as your pet. Some people carry the spiritual essence of, I call it the spirit of decay, but it's like a death kind of spirit, And if you're not careful, too much time around and with these people, it will feel like your spirit is starting to die. So it's for real and it's serious. But, emotions are meant to get our attention. They're meant to get our attention, and they help us in that manner, right? They help us to see the error in, all the excuses we make in certain situations and relationships. And, they're essentially, emotions are essentially an opportunity to tune into our present moment and to seek the lesson. That's how I like to see emotions. And we really need to stop demonizing them, really. They are messengers. So, I can't even read my writing here. Oh, yeah. Through the Christian lens, also repentance, right? And therefore, true reconciliation and peace can't be achieved without first acknowledging the shadow side. our faults. We have to acknowledge, where are our shortcomings, or, one term would be sins, right? I'm reminded of the verse that mentions, it's actually Matthew chapter 6, verse 22. It says, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." So it's a turning away. If you think about, we have two eyes, two physical eyes. Becoming whole, you might view it in this way. It's a turning away from the split nature, right? The dual nature, to one that is expanded enough to allow for it all. I'm tired, y'all. I hope I'm making some kind of sense for you. In other words, instead of choosing, one way or the other, or, this is acceptable, this is not. Let me put this over here in this category, and, just try to, I'm going to feel ashamed about it because I'm judging it. Instead of, living split off in this manner, like this wedge is, it's almost like I view, who do we think we are? To feel like we have the authority to judge ourselves, like we can do that accurately and fix it in some way. It's kind of like, it's sort of narcissistic, you might say. It's kind of a egoic, but when you're expanded enough, in other words, you've reached a place of maturity where you can, consciously acknowledge all parts of you, or both sides of you, your dual nature. There's a story that I first heard about in Clarissa Pinkola Estes' book, Women Who Run with the Wolves, that I love. It's called The Skeleton Woman. It's about this fisherman that's out, and he hooks this skeleton of a woman, if I'm recalling correctly, and he reels her in, and he's like terrified. He takes off running. Well, she's still hooked to his fishing rod, and so he's dragging her behind him the whole time he's running, and he's running for his life, and gets in his cabin, and she's just a total tattered mess, of bones by that point, I guess, where he drug her or whatever, and she's just a pile of bones, and he's looking at her and upon her, okay, in the story, and she slowly becomes whole again. She slowly becomes fleshed out, I think is the words that are used in the story, and I'm going to read a little bit to you, actually. Okay, so it's describing, and I'll drop the link to this website too in the description, but it's describing, the mess that the skeleton woman is in, in his cabin. The man reached his snow house and dove right into the tunnel, and on hands and knees scrabbled his way into the interior. Panting and sobbing, he lay there in the dark. In the dark. Remember, darkness can be representative of our unconscious, right? Panting and sobbing, he lay there in the dark, his heart a drum, a mighty drum. Safe at last. Oh, so safe. Yes, safe. Thank the gods. Raven. Yes, thank Raven. Yes, and all bountiful Sedna. Safe at last. Imagine when he lit his oil lamp. There she, or it, lay in a tumble upon his snow floor, one heel over her shoulder, one knee inside her rib cage, one foot over her elbow. He could not say later what it was. Perhaps the firelight softened her features, or the fact that he was a lonely man. But a feeling of some kindness came into his breathing, and slowly he reached out his grimy hands, and using words softly like a mother to a child, began to untangle her from the fishing line. Right? So it goes on to talk about, how this feeling came over him, and it was a feeling of compassion, right? But it began with him in the dark. It began with him, terrified and scared, and then the light is lit, right? So there's an awareness that happens also at the same time. The timing of these things in these stories is on purpose, right? It's to highlight the metaphors, to highlight the lessons for us. So as the light comes on and he sees her, I'm sure initially there's shock. And it's the same way with us when we discover what we thought, reality was, or the way we thought a person was or things were. We were totally wrong for a long time sometimes. So there is that first initial shock. But then there's... at some point there's compassion, there's love. I'm reminded of, these three things remain. It's like even after everything is torn down, there's destruction, there's the life, death, life circle, it's love that lights the fire. It's love that rekindles. It's the life force energy, right? That's what makes it, happen. Love makes the world go round, So, yeah. So then it says, he became drowsy, right? So he's untangling her, and speaking to her softly like a mother, okay? And it says, the man became drowsy, okay? Slid under his sleeping skins and soon was dreaming. And so as he's dreaming, there's this tear that escapes from his eye, from the dreamer's eye, right? It says. And it says, we never know what sort of dream causes this, but we know it is either a dream of sadness or longing. So here we see again the importance of particular feelings or emotions. They are, spiritually speaking, I feel like you might say alchemical ingredients or elements meant to help us transform, helpers in that manner, right? So there's this a dream of sadness or longing, okay? And it comes about into material reality through his tear. And that tears are can be representative of the cleansing, the washing, like a baptism of sorts, right? Renewal. And so it says, and this is what happened to the man, right? Skeleton Woman saw the tear glisten in the firelight, and she became suddenly so thirsty. She tinkled and clanked and crawled over to the sleeping man and put her mouth to his tear. The single tear was like a river, and she drank and drank and drank until her many years long thirst was, okay, I don't know this word, y'all. Slaked, I guess. SLAKED. So it says, while lying beside him, she reached inside the sleeping man and took out his heart, the mighty drum. She sat up and banged on both sides of it. As she drummed, she began to sing out, flesh, 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 flesh. And the more she sang, the more her body filled out with flesh. And it goes and, describes the details of that. And so then she returns the great drum, his heart, to his body. And it says, and that is how they awakened. There's a double meaning there. Literally how they woke up together because they were snuggled in together at the end of the story, and they awoke that way. But also they awoke, you might say, consciously. They awoke, because of this process that was described in beautiful metaphor to us. And maybe even, waking up the heart, cracking open the heart, so that love can actually flourish. Because what was once dark and broken, but there was a longing for it. See, this missing part, this missing piece. Now it has been, taken home, and brought into the light. It has been nurtured and mothered. And he could have just as easily looked at her and her horrible condition and just totally shamed her and just, said a lot of bad things about her, but he didn't. And that's the same way we need to treat our shadow self. I'm thinking of the term skeletons in the closet. Similar. Not really the same, but similar here. So, yeah. So the pivotal point, you might say, was when he began to feel this sadness or longing, right? Longing for what? Sadness for what? I would say our whole self, spiritually speaking, it would be the God part, that belongs inside of our heart, the Holy Spirit too, that doesn't condemn, your faults and flaws, but loves you anyway, an unconditional, godly kind of love. And through the Christian lens, there's a remedy for that, for our faults and flaws too. So, but yeah, it's to me, you could just look at this as, the sadness or longing could be for our whole self, which includes the part that we'll find in the underworld that's shown in the hero's journey, right? And all the different stories that are variations of that. The shadow self. And furthermore, we must bring it into the light and not be ashamed, right? And so James chapter 5, verse 16 in the Bible says, confess your faults one to another and pray for another that you may be healed. So, right there we have directives to, not to overlook, not to dismiss, not to be so ashamed of that we just totally deny, even to ourselves. So, we're supposed to accept and admit and furthermore even confess, right? So, I want to go back to what I was talking about earlier. I want to say this. The pressure that we endure to be perfect when we are with someone whose number one concern in life is to be seen as perfect, it's an awful thing to experience that kind of pressure, because the whole time you're with this person, you'll always fall short in their eyes. You'll always fall short. Because you're considered, again, an extension of them. You're expected to conform as part of their mask. It's like they're choosing a life of acting. One part of their life, one side of their life is acting, and they expect you to go along with that. I believe it's, I've watched him recently, that's why he's on my mind, but I believe it was Sam Vaknin that said it's you might call this a shared fantasy, that you're a part of that when you're involved with someone like this. So it's almost like you're not allowed to have faults, and when you're used to just being, because you've never had a reason to put on an act before, then when you are suddenly expected to be perfect, which is not possible, it's paralyzing to your spirit, because it doesn't matter what you do. It's like, again, with an overt person, they're going to, vocalize their shaming of you. But with a covert, they're just going to be, just looking down on you, giving you harsh looks, or gaslighting you, making you doubt your own reality and question your sanity and your memory and everything else, right? So it paralyzes you. So in so doing, that numinous cord that I talk about a lot in my videos, it's like it's whittled down to a thread. And that's where you find yourself in the fog, So the journey back to wholeness the journey back to wholeness in leaving someone like this means knowing that they'll continue in their charade, but now you're free to just be you, right? Faults and all. You escaped, essentially, the trap of delusion. That's what happened. Okay? And of course, it's your nature to want to learn and grow and evolve, because we all have room to improve. But, you don't have to live with the pressure of hiding your perfect imperfections. So it's just a comfortable place to be. a place of humility and acceptance where you can choose to accept that gift of divine grace and mercy. It's a gift. So you realize that those who are truly meant for you to share in life with you, they're also going to be relaxed in this manner. You're going to feel relaxed in their presence. They're going to feel relaxed in your presence. That's sharing in a place of peace with the people that are good for you. It's a place of freedom too. Freedom and peace that some will never know, and that's very sad. But you can know that place. You can. Our emotions are not to be feared. Our shadow is not our enemy. It's a catalyst. It's meant to be more of a transformative inner coach, you might say, right? And what do coaches do? They don't lord over you and enforce rules. They're not punishing or harsh. They remind you. They're there to remind you, to stay on your path, to help you recall all the pieces and parts of you, that were lost, to help you be whole again. So, it's always our option to act from what you might call the dark side, right? It's free will to do so. But to understand and appreciate this great power in wholeness that we have, all the aspects of us, it's there's power in being whole, and to understand it is to appreciate it. I feel like God loves us so much that He has entrusted us with all these beautiful different aspects of us that are powerful, right? Like a little mini version. When you have that numinous spark of God, that divine spark, numinous part or divine spark inside of us. It's like that Holy Spirit helper, that can't really be defined. That's the hidden place. That can't fully be understood by someone who doesn't share in that same spirit. And it's meant to be that way for a reason. It's our protection, and it's also our power. So in this manner, embracing, our duality, our shadow self, our faults or whatever, it can be even a way to defend ourselves too, right? If you don't have anything you're ashamed of, then, if somebody comes along and they think they can figure out what it is that you're embarrassed about or ashamed of, it's just going to fall flat. Their efforts to exploit that within you, it's just going to fall flat. You're like, yeah, so, there's no longer a trigger there because there's no wound there anymore. You've been healed. It's fleshed out. See, it's not a sore spot anymore. So God could have made us powerless, but He didn't. He could have made us to not have the power of choice, but He didn't. It's like the gift of being able to show our teeth. Just a little glimmer of the power of God's wrath. It's almost like with these people, when you're operating unconscious of your shadow self, and they are already conscious, people who have bad intentions, liars, deceivers, manipulators, they are already conscious of their shadow self. And they've accepted it, and they are consciously denying it as part of their facade to fool you and exploit you, But in the beginning, you're unaware of your shadow self, right? When you become aware of it and you integrate it within, suddenly you understand the design of the human psyche, so you can now look at these people and you can see them more clearly too. And you can see what they're doing a lot of times, to some extent, at least, right? At the minimum, at the least. And sometimes you can just smile at them and it'll terrify them, A wolf in sheep's clothing, it'll be terrifying to them because it's like a mirror reflecting back to them. When they see that you have the awareness now, okay, and you see it not only in yourself, but you see it in them, it's reflecting back to them like a mirror. And it's shining back that same power of awareness, right? That they have and that they are abusing, but you're not abusing it. And it's much greater within you, this power of awareness, because you have the spark of God inside of you. And that is terrifying to someone who is living consciously, intentionally in the darkness. So, in this, I call it an upside down world. It feels that way to a lot of us, I know. But in this upside down world, collectively, we seem to think of power as mostly negative. But if we were to think of that like, okay, well, what if that's a victim mindset? Because we are seeing it as other or foreign and not belonging to us, like it's bad to be powerful. Some of us, I think, have these unconscious belief structures that are very limiting. All right, we deem it like a selfish thing, right? It's selfish and wrong to be powerful sometimes. And in so doing that, to become powerful might actually be judged within ourselves, even unconsciously, as wrong and bad. And then that can now become part of our shadow self. And when it becomes part of our shadow self, it then becomes inaccessible. We just made that inaccessible. That's like the way I see the mechanics of a victim mindset. So at the full spectrum or extreme end of this, it might manifest as even a martyr complex. Totally self-sacrificial. See, God doesn't want us to take that place. Jesus explained time and again in parables how the power of God is accessible within us through faith. When our shadow self is unconscious and dormant, it can wreak havoc in our life. You might think of it as ruling over us. When our shadow self is made conscious, and I say made conscious on purpose, made conscious because there's work to bring it into the light, right? Then we can accept it and we can release the need to judge it. It's one of the most challenging things to do ever in our life. But accepting it means that it can't be exploited. And that gives you empowerment, right? So, we're still going to be imperfect, but we won't be holding on to our imperfections like they're baggage, okay? Because we check our judgment at the gate of awareness. It stops there. So what happens? Our faults and our flaws stay in our conscious awareness. We work on them too. We want to learn and grow. But they stay in our conscious awareness. And in so doing, we become more considerate of others. Because, again, once you understand yourself more, to know thyself, well, now you can understand others more too. And that creates more compassion, more self-compassion and more compassion for others, just like in the skeleton woman story, right? So in welcoming all aspects of ourselves and not feeling ashamed just to be silly or to make mistakes or to stumble over our words or whatever it is that, in the past we might have been embarrassed about or, judged ourselves for. When we can fully embrace all parts of ourselves, flaws and all, and we do that in the presence of others, it invites them to do the same. All right, they feel comfortable to fully be themselves in our presence. That's a beautiful gift to give someone, especially if a person has possibly never even experienced that ever because of a toxic family they've been enmeshed in, Being in your presence may be the first time ever they've ever felt, again, that messenger, aspect. They've ever had the emotion of peace and felt like, I can finally relax and just, get to know myself consciously now. See? So there's no pretentiousness, in a place like that. Because why? Because there's no secrets. There's nothing to hide. because there's no judgment there, right? So there's no need for darkness when you want to live in the light. So I hope you enjoyed this message. I hope that it gave you something of value. I hope it got the wheels turning. It's always my goal. I thank you so much for coming along to hear it. I hope that you have a beautiful day, and I plan on filming some more as soon as I can. But again, I just hope you enjoyed this one today. Have a wonderful and beautiful day, great week ahead, and I'll see you again very soon.